I'd like to introduce our speaker, Ms. Desfosses. Uh, Dr. Helen Desfosses is a professor emerita in public affairs and policy from the State University of New York at Albany. She has a BA in Russian language and literature from Mount Holyoke College, an MA in Soviet studies from Harvard, and a PhD in political science from the Boston University African Studies Center. She was president of the Albany, New York City Council for two four-year terms. She is the author of many books and articles on contemporary politics. He has been a frequent lecturer in public policy at OLLI for the past several years. Go ahead, Mr. Fozes.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody. I'm so glad you're here today. I love speaking to OLLI. It animates me when I know that I not only have a good topic, which is American exceptionalism and what's happening, what are the lessons we can learn from this really complicated election year, and also a wonderful audience like OLLI, where everybody always has very strong opinions about everything and no shyness about voicing them. So I've asked Mike to give us a lot of time for questions and answers, and I'm not going to speak for very long, but I do want to make some critical points before we start. The January 6th mob attacks are one of the starting points of my thinking about today's lecture. I don't know about you, but I was absolutely stunned by those attacks. I never thought we would see such a thing in the United States of America. And that belief is called American exceptionalism, that other countries might have mob attacks, other countries might have mob invasions, but not the United States of America. And that doctrine of American exceptionalism has been a very, very important part of our thinking about our country and our role in our country, and what we want in our leaders and what behavior we'll tolerate as part of our foreign and domestic policy. So American exceptionalism is the belief that the United States is inherently different from other countries and inherently better than other countries. And that surely such a thing as a mob attack would not be present here. So I began to look for lessons from that mob invasion on January 6th. And I must say that I think I'm suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, political PTSD. It was such a strong shock, I think, for most Americans to see our own capital being invaded, to see the behavior. And I don't know if many of you have been watching the impeachment trial of Donald Trump that's going on as we speak at this minute. But the films that were shown yesterday, almost all day, about the mob invasion were just riveting and shattering. I mean, much more so than if you even were a participant, I gather. To see the film, to see the totality of the invasion and what lay behind it and what was going on at the time from minute to minute was just an amazingly shocking experience. But I want to talk about some lessons of this whole presidential election year, including the mob invasion. And lesson number one is, for all of the drama and all of the agitation and upset of the 2020 election year so far, the center has held. The center of American politics, the center of our institutions, they have been maintained, they have held. There's not been any thoughts whatsoever that our country was going to fall apart, that our institutions were under attack. Our institutions held, the center of our democracy held. And I think that's one of the most important takeaways that we can have. Lesson number two is that there was more candidate and voter activity expressing a belief in American exceptionalism than we've seen in a long, long time. I think that's partly a result of the personality and the approach of Donald John Trump, who basically set the story, set the pace set the terms for a number of aspects of the 2020 election. His personality, his money, his confrontational style just took over a lot of things. And so therefore, the belief in American exceptionalism, that our country is inherently different and better from all other countries, is one thing that he held very strongly, and one thing that his followers have held very strongly as well. American exceptionalism, the belief in this, is not always positive. It's not something that we, sometimes we've been known in history, as you know, as the ugly Americans, as people who throw our weight around, who assume that we don't have to be participants as much as controllers of a lot of the processes in international politics. Donald Trump's behavior was extremely incendiary. And a lot of people are wondering, and this is again what's going on in the impeachment trial today, whether or not he should be found guilty of agitating and basically causing the mob behavior on January 6th. And to what extent is that a result of statements that he made, appeals that he made, agitating remarks that he made, and encouragement that he made to people who were behaving in a mob way. Another lesson, lesson number 8, is we have to take some definitive steps to prevent a reprise of his incendiary behavior and his responsibility for mob violence. A lot of people are very concerned in these impeachment trials that are going on right now that he be stopped in some way from ever running for politics, for an office in the United States again. And one of the subtexts that you'll see and you'll hear if you watch the news tonight when you get home, or you turn on the TV as soon as we're done here today, is you'll hear a lot of people not only talking about, is he guilty of fomenting this mob violence, but should he be punished in some way? And what would that punishment be? Should it be something that affects only him, or that affects his future abilities to run for a political office in the United States? My personal reaction to the events of January 6th was, as I said, a case of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. I found it I couldn't believe it, first of all. I'm 70 something years old. I just could not believe that I was seeing mob attacks against our Capitol, and that I was seeing the level of violence that was going on. And of course, the cameras took us everywhere. And this trial that's going on now meant that all day, the day before yesterday, there were nothing but films, beautifully edited, to represent the entire day of political and mob activity. So I think that we're going to find that, like 9/11, the events of January 6th, 2021, will be in the American political consciousness for years and decades to come. And responses to whatever people gleaned from that experience, whatever lessons they drew from that experience, are going to be determinative of a lot of political behavior and a lot of laws that get passed over the next several months and the next several years. Because to see mob violence in the United States of America, I think, was even more disturbing than if I had seen films of, obviously, of mob violence in countries that are known for that. And I'm a student of developing areas. I've been to every developing area in the world. I've lectured on political development in almost many countries around the world. And I've never seen, you can say, well, okay, mob violence in this country in the developing world, that country, maybe Eastern Europe, even in the Soviet Union, maybe you've seen some examples of efforts of this, but not the United States. In fact, when the first announcement came over the television, I really had to jump up and turn up the volume because I couldn't even believe what I was actually hearing them say. So I think there's a lot of upset in the American political psyche, a lot of political post-traumatic stress disorder that's stemming from that. And I think the challenges are going to be to figure out, all of us to figure out what lessons we should be learning from that mob attack, and whether we should feel that it's possible this is going to happen again and again and again, or whether we should just attribute it to the personal behavior and atypical political behavior of Donald John Trump. So with that, I'll close and ask you for your questions and your observations about the lessons of the 2021 political climate.
Yes, if you would please use the raise hand feature found in the reactions icon, and we can go ahead and look at you being presented. Mr. Moskopoulos, go ahead, sir.
Yes, the recent events, they're obviously, as you described them, terrible for the country and everybody. But shouldn't the country, the two parties and more, go back 4 years ago to find out what prompted half of the country to vote an unknown, non-political person who we didn't know his character being what it is, which is not good, as well as what he did. So what prompted the country to vote for him? Because that is going to guarantee that he's not going to be elected again. That is the main thing. What attracted the people to vote for him?
Henry, I think you're raising an excellent point. I mean, he came out of nowhere in terms of politics. He had never had any political experience whatsoever. I mean, not even on a board where people could challenge him with their voting behavior. The boards he was on, people didn't vote and challenge him. So this was an amazing thing. He'd never taken a poli-sci course. He basically didn't even know what the procedures and practices and institutions of American politics were like. And I mention that only to reinforce the point that you're making, Henry, and that is that this man came out of nowhere and was elected by huge margins, and we knew nothing about him other than that he had been a successful political commentator and appearer on political TV. But we knew nothing. We knew that he was a huckster. We knew that he could sell anything to anybody, I gather. We knew that he had enormous financial success. We had no idea of the number of bankruptcies or anything like that. And the man was swept into office. And we was more surprised than anybody else. I don't know if you remember the election night, but I remember watching it. I was glued to the TV being a political scientist, but I remember watching it, and the person that was most stunned whenever the numbers were ratcheted up again in his favor was Donald Trump. At one point, he had his head in his hands. He was at some kind of a cocktail party. He was standing off all by himself with his head in his hand, shaking his head. I don't understand what's happening. What is going on that I should be being elected president of the United States? So the good news is, I suppose, in a Horatio Alger point of view, that anybody can experience enormous political success in the United States. The bad news is that he paid dearly, and we paid dearly, for having someone in that office who knew so little about American politics and so little about how to conduct himself or what was best for the nation. I think he thought he would be elected again for a second term. I mean, I frankly think there, but for the grace of God, go we, because there was some evidence at the end of his first term that he was bringing in staff members who wanted a more, confrontational American style in foreign policy, a more confrontational American style in commercial policy vis-a-vis China. A lot of things were about to really change if he had had a second term. So my own sense of relief was quite strong. One term was good, one term was enough.
Okay, Mr. Berry, go ahead and unmute, sir.
Always a pleasure to listen to you and get your thoughts on the current events. Most of us on the screen today Washingtonians, Beltway people are going to be in full agreement with you. But there's a lot more people around the country that, not that they disagree, I think they're just not that interested in what's going on here. Their minds made up, and now they're worrying about other things. Whether they're going to get the vaccination and the economy and the jobs. And so what lasting effect all of this stuff in the Senate this week will have on the rest of the country is not clear to me. And I'd love your thoughts on that.
That's a very good point. Donald Trump has 80 million supporters. 80 million people voted for Donald Trump this past election. 80 million. I mean, that's just an extraordinary number, and obviously exceeded only by the votes that Biden got. Otherwise, Donald Trump would be our president. But he is an enormously popular man. He has an extremely strong following. I don't think we've heard the end of him in American politics. And I was thinking the other day that the analogy in my own mind between the role that Donald Trump is going to play, whether he gets elected or not, he's going to be a lasting figure in American politics. He's very wealthy. He's very articulate. The press loves him. He makes it very easy to cover him, as you know. And he does dramatic things, and he does things that get attention every night. When he was president, I don't know if you remember, but at the end of every afternoon, if he hadn't done something already that had been covered by the press and he knew was going to be on the 6 o'clock news, he held a news conference deliberately at like as late as he could in the afternoon to make sure, sometimes when he was getting on the helicopter, he would turn around and make some incredibly strong and wild statement, and then the door would close behind him and off he'd go. And of course, that statement then became the subject of the 6 o'clock news. He's a consummate politician and a consummate mass communicator. I don't think we've ever had anybody who was as good at being a mass communicator as he was. And to your point, Henry, I think this is what's going to keep him. He's going to be in the limelight forever. I was thinking of the analogy of Father Coughlin. I don't know if any of you remember Father Coughlin during the Roosevelt era. He was, he had no elected office, but he was one of the most influential political figures in the United States during the Roosevelt years. And I think that Donald Trump is going to play the exact same role. He'll be a critic. He'll be a lightning rod. He'll be someone who has incredible numbers of followers for years to come. And we're going to see how he uses that.
Ann Smith, go ahead, please.
Yes. Trump has, as you said, great allegiance from his followers, and they seem to have taken over a large portion of the Republican Party and revealed cracks in the party, particularly with the moderate wing. So I'm wondering if you think the Republican Party will fracture and new parties will be formed, not necessarily this year, but in the next few years?
That's a wonderful question. In fact, watching this impeachment trial that's been going on the last few days, there's been discussion among the Republican members about whether they should or would fracture and form separate parties. Because at one point in the discussion the last couple of days was maybe the pro-Trump people could never get along with the anti-Trump people. And this was going to be a great partisan divide that would divide the Republican Party and eventually American politics in general for years to come. And I think that Mitch McConnell has been sitting on his hands for a long time the last few days, just watching this, not saying anything. But people are waiting to see what he might do if it really looks like the party might fracture. And as you know, there's a lot of divisions in the Republican Party, even without Trump. The Lincoln Project and various other groups of younger politicians who are impatient and not really accepting of the party's leadership. And then along comes Trump, of course, who becomes a meteoric presence in the party atmosphere, and he's going to be pulling at people for a long time. The final thing I'd mention about Trump, he has a lot of money. Obviously, he had $207 million before this year's challenge to the election results. Okay, so in his campaign coffers, say by the beginning of March, he had $207 million. Then when he launched this challenge against the results of this election, he raised another $110 million that people just kept sending him because they thought that the reason that he couldn't get the evidence that he was looking for, that the election was a fraud, was that he didn't have enough money. So his supporters sent him in $5, $10, $20 amounts, $210 million. Plus, of course, included in that was a lot of money he threw in of his own. But the man has money, he has influence, he has immediate access to any microphone anywhere within 100 miles. If he wants to say something, the press is going to be there immediately. So I think we're going to see a lot of influence, a lot of impact from him. And the final point I'd mention, you may have noticed, and you will continue to notice over the next several months, sort of a pilgrimage of young would-be Republican candidates going to Mar-a-Lago to kiss the ring of Donald Trump and to gain his blessing. And as long as that keeps up, right, he becomes an even stronger force within the Republican Party and within the future of United States politics.
Peggy Thurber, go ahead, please.
Hello, Professor. Thank you. This is a really disturbing topic. I share your shock and horror about what happened on January 6th. The whole world is watching us. I have family in Germany. My cousin texted me that day, basically saying, what the heck is happening? Donald Trump has no concept of what it means to be a public servant. He believes that he believed that he was the CEO of this country and ran this country, where in actual fact, he worked for the people and he did not understand that. The first person I think asked a question about what do people want, he's appealing to their basest nature. He's appealing to nationalism and racism in the same way that the Nazi Party did.
I didn't get it. What the hell's going on?
Well,
It's really, I'm so grateful that the other candidate prevailed. I would have voted for anybody in opposition to this man because he was destroying this country.
Well, you know, you're making an excellent point, and that is that the concept of public service is not one that was driving him. You know, I think we're spoiled in this country, and that's what I meant about the mob attack being another shock. But we're used to politicians who are either motivated by public service or talk about being motivated by public service. So Donald J. Trump was a totally unusual political figure who didn't even bother mentioning public service. I mean, it was like, okay, here I am. I have the answers. I have the answers. You have all the questions, obviously. You need me and I've got the answers and let's get on with it. So this mess of having to run for office and all of that could just get in the way. That's not what I'm about. I just want to get in there and express the answers. And you know, if you've never been on a town council, you've never been at a board that even could question you, as I said in the beginning, what are you going to do when people start challenging your views? And that's when his whole hold on the American political process began to fall apart, because as he was challenged, he didn't know what to do with it. He didn't know how to play now, there, or he didn't want to play now, there, or come, let us sit down and reason together. That wasn't his style, nor was it the style of his aides. And you remember that the people that first went to the White House with him, within a couple of weeks, most of them were fired. Do you remember that? Or they left. They just, you know, there was too much of a clash of personalities. He thought it was about personalities. And if I said, then you can't say. So that didn't work. And then at the end of his stay in the White House, there were a lot of young aides that were the only people left, literally, that they could put in these council rooms with him and try to, give him a walkthrough every morning of what was going to be on his calendar. But he didn't want to listen to these young people. He thought, gee, I run big companies. I know what's best. And nor did he want to read the morning briefing book that they put together for him. Now that's a very poignant story in itself. Every night, my son worked in the White House for a while, but every night they would prepare for the president a compendium, basically, of background material on issues he'd be dealing with the next day. And in theory, the president would take it to the Lincoln bedroom, and instead of holding on to his wife, would be reading the nightly compendium. Donald J. Trump, he didn't want to read the compendium. In fact, they kept making it skinnier and skinnier and skinnier over his time in the White House because they were convinced maybe he wouldn't read 80 pages, but maybe he'd read 50. No. Maybe he'd read 20. No. Maybe he'd read 1. No, that didn't work either. So the whole process of how you work with a political leader just fell apart in terms of working with Donald Trump.
But you mentioned that you are hopeful that laws will be passed. I'm pretty skeptical because we had 4 years to pass a law requiring presidential candidates to provide financial disclosure,
Right.
and that was not done. So what other kinds of laws do you see necessary to help prevent this from recurring?
Well, you're asking a good question. I think people were afraid. That is an interesting point. No leader was willing to ask for his financial records. All of the people, the past couple of years, nobody has even brought it up. The press even stopped talking about it. It just was an amazing thing. Like it just disappeared as an issue. And obviously it was just the beginning of the number of challenges that could have been voiced against the president. I think we kind of lost our way this time. And the first questioner made this point that all of a sudden people were asking today, all of a sudden people were asking, well, let's have somebody new. Let's have somebody new. Where's somebody new? We kind of got, I don't know what, derailed from the political processes. Politics is a process as much as it is a thought pattern or a way of thinking or an approach to issues. It's a process. People run, you examine their thoughts, you examine how they're thinking, you look at the types of people that are supporting them. We had none of that information about Donald J. Trump, and he just all of a sudden was elected. And as I say, he was as shocked as we were. When I went to bed that night, I was beside myself. I think I was basically catatonic because I was so shocked. I couldn't even say anything. Can you imagine that? And of course, the next morning, hey, life goes on. He's the president to be. People start showing up at his doorstep with portfolios of information they think he needs to have. And next thing you know, he's being sworn in. So that's the way it works. The good news about America is that the center holds. No matter who gets in there, no matter how rough the election is, the center, that is the belief in our institutions and their value, has held for 200 and some odd years, thank God. People can come and go from the right and the left and whatever, but the center has held. And I think that's something that we really have to believe in.
Okay, the raise hands, many. You will be taken in the order that you're listed. So as in the order of how you can raise. Right now, Ian Brooks, go ahead, please.
Yeah, well, first of all, I believe that he received 74 million votes, not 80 million votes in the last election.
I'm sorry, you could be right. I just looked it up. I'm sorry, that could be absolutely correct. And the point is that he got millions and millions of
votes. Yeah. But I do believe that the money, we're not talking about, I know we're talking about his incompetence, but he has serious mental health issues. He is a, you know, a narcissist, among other things. And that is driving a lot of his behavior and policies. And I think, you know, we can't ignore that. That is part of what's going on here. And one of the characteristics of somebody with those characteristics is they're able to bring people in. There's something about their personality that attracts a lot of people to them. And he's been able to do that with so many Americans who felt like they were disenfranchised. I think that I don't believe that the Republican Party is going to split. I think they have been very, in their behavior, they have been zombie-like in voting for him in everything that he wants, and including this second impeachment, because they're going to acquit him again. And even though the evidence is overwhelming, it's not making one bit of difference to these people. So I think that he still has a tremendous hold on the party. It is the Trump party. It's not the Republican Party, and it doesn't seem to be splintered to me at all. I think they're very much together, even though privately they may be saying different things. They are in marching order, and as I said, acting in a zombie-like way, following his guidance. So I'm not as optimistic. I'm glad that we have an American system that kind of keeps us going, and we have a new president. But I think that the Republican Party is going to be doing whatever they can to prevent Biden from getting his agenda, um, you know, in any way taken over the next 4 years.
Oh, boy, you raised so many good points. I think one of them I'd like to respond to too is that I think we weren't really paying attention to who was running and why they were running and whether we had enough people running and whatever. I don't think we're going to make that mistake again in either political party. I think we're going to be much more mindful of meteors that can come up from any section of the sky and streak across. The next thing you know, they're elected. I think we're going to be paying a lot more attention to grooming people to run for office, to encouraging young people to get involved in politics. I mean, it is, as I say, a process. You have to spend a few years at it anyway, and get your sea legs underneath you. And I think we're going to be paying a little bit more attention too to citizen engagement, because that's another thing that happened. A lot of the followers of Donald J. Trump feel like nobody else was paying any attention to them. Nobody else was speaking on their behalf. And I mean, that is another element of his genius, of his mass communication genius, that he a multi-millionaire, billionaire, whatever, was able to make even the poorest person in the Republican Party feel like he was representing them and he cared about them. And I mean, that is a skill, and he's got it, and he used it, and the press loved it. And his ability to respond to the needs of the press, I started to make that point before, but he's very mindful of the press's need to file a story every day. And if they weren't covering him by noontime, as I said, he called them and said, hey, are you looking for a good story? Well, let me tell you, here's what I've been thinking about. And anything he said became the news. He was that newsworthy and that pithy. You have to be pretty pithy, pithy, to be followed by the press, because they like quick headlines.
You're right about that, and I think that's going to stop.
He didn't go on in the 9,000 word, synopsis. He had a few remarks to say, and then he'd get on the helicopter. Remember?
But that's going to stop. That's going to. He's not going to get as much press anymore, and he's off of social media. So I think that that part's going to stop.
A lot of it's going to stop, but the point I'm making, though, is about politics in general. I think we learned a few lessons here, that while we were not watching, people were running anyway, even people that we weren't paying attention to and didn't necessarily want to represent us. And I think that the American people, the political types, like you, we're all political types here today. We're going to be paying a lot more attention to who's running, and maybe saying, and what our children and grandchildren are thinking about American politics than we have in many, many years. I know I'm talking to my grandsons all the time. What are you seeing on TV? What are you thinking about what you're seeing? Are you worried? Are you interested in getting involved in any way? Let me take you down to party headquarters. I've got a 16-year-old grandson and a 14-year-old grandson, and I'm already signing them up, you know? Just to be citizens, to be good citizens is an important role too. So I think to be mindful of the political process in general is what I'm urging people to do.
Dorothy Getchell, go ahead, please.
Yes, I think that it should be pointed out that, as the last speaker alluded, Trump is a sociopath. This guy is crazy. And he had no remorse, no compassion for what happened on January 6th. The reports that I've heard is that he was delighted. He was glad about the brawl that he had incited. Yeah. And I think it's going to take a generation for us to recover from the damage he's done to our political system and country. Also, from the very beginning, the night of the election, he came on and said he won before the votes were even counted. This big lie. This is like Goebbels in Nazi Germany. He has brainwashed, or who knows what he's done to his followers and to all the enablers in the Senate who will refuse, it looks like, to convict this guy. So this to me is just a huge aberration in American politics, this man.
I hope you're right. You know, the other factor that you didn't mention too is that the press has been very loath to challenge him.
You're right about that. Everybody has.
Basically, he could say anything. They just sat on their hands. And that was a big gap. I mean, if the people weren't challenging him and the press wasn't challenging him, he had more and more of a full arena to play in than ever before, and the money to support his endeavors.
Yeah, but there were people, Professor, who were challenging him on the Democratic side. There were people who challenged him.
Yes, I know.
The problem was that the country is so polarized, nothing could be done to stop this guy.
Yeah.
And I think that I'm much more optimistic than you are, in the sense that I don't think that young, hopeful Republicans are going to go down to Mar-a-Lago to kiss his ring. I think that the Republican Party is a lot more fractured than I've heard today in this class. And I'm like Nikki Haley came out today and said we shouldn't follow Trump anymore. I mean, I think that the resistance is there, but I think it's going to take a generation to clean up this mess.
Yeah,
our country caused by this sociopath.
I agree, and frankly, people don't know whom to follow in the Republican Party right now, and I'm very mindful of the points that you're making. I listen to the news, well, several times a day, and I'm always mindful of who's gone to Mar-a-Lago that day. And a lot of the young politicians in the Republican Party are making that trek. Now, I don't know why, I don't know what they're expecting to get out of it, whether they are getting out what they want, but they're going down to Mar-a-Lago, either for financial support, for psychological support, for whatever, for just being known to have been there. It's still an important factor. And if people weren't sure right after the election whether his star had obviously been shattered. And even Mitch McConnell wasn't sure what role to play the next day vis-a-vis Donald Trump. But Donald Trump, you know, just won the day. And Mitch McConnell, who was going to be standoffish and give every other Republican leader a chance, boom. Within 24 hours the next day, he was right there with Donald Trump. And so here we go. We're off and
well, that's true. It's like mass psychosis on the Republican side. I just want to say, I think that President Biden is just so opposite all of this. this
I know.
madness.
Isn't it wonderful?
Yes, he presents a hopeful, empathetic, caring side.
Yeah.
It's so needed in our
Yeah.
politics now.
And fortunately, we've got 4 years. I mean, already, obviously, people are running for 2024. And you've obviously been hearing the discussions about who's going to run, who's going to be entering this primary, that primary. I mean, that started even before the election was over in the fall. And that's the way it's got to be. But a lot of things are being done. I think Biden is trying to be very attentive to some of the main issues of the day. A lot of would-be Republican leaders, Marco Rubio, a lot of people like that are already getting their shoulders in there and elbowing in their way to be seen as potential future leaders of the Republican Party. I mean, it's amazing. I've run for office. I've won in many elections, and I've lost in many elections. And as soon as you lose, as soon as the first phone call comes through that you have lost an election, all the people at the party just literally wander away from you. I mean, they can make that transition immediately. And that's what's happening in American politics right now. As long as Trump has money and influence and whatever, people will go to Mar-a-Lago and say whatever they need to say. But as soon as that begins to fade, they'll be gone. They'll go somewhere else. It's just part of the process.
Steve Greenhouse, go ahead, sir.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, you put your finger on it when you said he has a genius for the way he can appeal to certain people. And I'd like to be more specific about his appeal. I think he identified 2 strains in America that he went after. And those strains are white supremacy and Christian nationalism.
Excellent. Excellent.
And I think close to half the people in this country fit into one or both of those categories. And those are the 74 million who voted for him. And he identified that group, and he demonstrated, as you said, a genius for appealing to the members of those groups. And I think we have a big problem in this country that's not going to go away just because he goes away. And I just identified what those 2 problems are. We're not over the Civil War. We still have roughly half the population that think that the white race is the superior race and that the other races should be subjugated. And then this Christian nationalism is scary because they believe that Christianity has been dissed in this country, put down, and this is largely evangelicals, and they want to turn the tables on that. And they saw in Trump someone who spoke to their those feelings, which are very emotional. And I think that explains a good bit of his political genius and success.
Yes, you've expressed it very, very well. I can just say one thing, but he captured the whole arena of people who felt that no one else in the political arena had been paying attention to them. Like you say, the evangelicals, the people who were super patriots, you know. So Trump put his finger again in that incredible genius that he had for putting his finger on the issues that were important, not only to this person or that person, but to huge groups of people which they represented. The evangelicals, hundreds of millions of evangelicals of all persuasions. The super patriots, you know, he went to every American Legion convention, all of these younger right-wing patriotic groups, this white supremacist groups. I mean, he just put this mishmash together, and he's running on that basis. Now, we don't know what he's going to try to do in the next election. And one of the things that's going on as we speak with the impeachment trial against him is trying to figure out, can they bring charges against him in such a way that there's a penalty that means that he cannot run for political office again. And that was the big fight that was going on this morning when I last turned on the TV. What would be the penalties if you could corral him and you could come up with charges against him? Could you come up with the kinds of charges that would mean that he would not be eligible to run for office again? And the Constitution does talk about things like that. So it's a cat and mouse game in a very, very real and scary way, what's happening right now down the street as you and I are talking.
Charlie Ostat, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I'd like to offer an answer to the first question that was asked about how did we get here with Trump being elected in 2016. And I'm convinced that it was social media on the internet, aided and abetted by the Russians. No question about it, really. You begin to whip up that frenzy. He's a maximum carnival barker kind of person. Communicates with rallies, with lies, and on the internet with Twitter. Fortunately, Twitter's been taken away from him. And I'm not sure if he has gotten another social media entree yet. I haven't heard anything about him. If anybody knows what he's talking on now, I'd be interested to know.
I don't
All
know.
that said, I'm very much more optimistic than you are, Professor, about him disappearing.
You are
Because
optimistic?
I do not
He's gonna
think the
disappear?
Southern District of New York is going to let him off the hook on his financial business.
Oh, yeah.
I do not think Georgia is going to let him off the hook on trying to buy 1,780 votes from them. And I think he's going to be fighting both lawsuits and criminal indictments for the next 4 years, and he will fade. He will not be anything but damaged goods by the time 2024 comes around.
Wow, that's an interesting point of view. I think I lived in Albany, New York for many years before I moved down here. I was city council president in Albany. And somehow I had the feeling that Trump was just going to be wheeling and dealing his way out of his troubles, the way he got into his troubles, $1 million here, 200 million there, get away from the prosecutors and all that stuff. But maybe you're right. Maybe the jig is up and he's going to be so wrapped up by all of these political and court proceedings, he won't be able to go forward. But I
really think he will be
until I see it.
Okay, Joan and Jack, go ahead, please.
Joan and Jack.
There we go. Here we are. Helen, you alluded to the fact you thought if Trump was reelected, he was heading toward better appointments. I disagree with that. I thought one of the great evidences of where he was going earlier was when Mathis left. And then later on, the way he handled the virus advisory business and undercut people like Fauci was terrible. And then they had that absolute fool of a radiologist, Saunders, take over as the chief scientist on the epidemic was absolutely a terrible choice. So I just don't agree. I thought it would have been the same disaster as he proved when he went psychopathic on us sociopathic on us in this whole terrorism approach. He wasn't getting any better.
I think maybe you and I misunderstood each other, because I certainly didn't think that he surrounded himself with good people. In fact, the people that were with him at the very beginning of his term soon left, the McMasters, people like that.
No, I agree, yeah.
And then the next group of people was fired by him. And then finally, he did have nothing but the dregs that were left, or the youngest people on the staff of various agencies in the White House that were the only people that he could get to come to his meetings. So I mean, I think he was a disaster as an administrator, which a president has to be as much as anything else. And in addition to his inabilities to deal with the realities of the political process. But he still has millions and millions of people who consider themselves his supporters. So, how you put that combination together is you win an election based on what you do right, what the other side does wrong, and a heavy dose of fate. That's what I've discovered in the elections I've lost and won. What you do right, what the other side does wrong, and a heavy dose of fate. And Donald J. Trump was helped in the first time he got elected by all of those factors. And we'll see if he can keep all those balls in the air the next time he runs. We'll see what
Some of
happens.
this damage he did is gonna last for 20 years on international front and elsewhere. Just a
Well, the international
devastating.
front didn't seem to bother people the last time. The fact that he had no foreign policy experience, people thought that was funny when he went to NATO, remember? And he turned his back on his fellow NATO leaders. He just turned away from them. People thought that was cute. The press even was remarking about it. So I'm not sure. The American people, God love them. Maybe they'll have a chance to just stop and think about a few things that's important, that he's shown us are really important in a president, and that they need to say, do you have it or do you not if you're running?
Mr. Mercer, go ahead, please. Unmute.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to say that my background, I worked in like 45, 50 developing countries, helping set up anti-corruption and integrity programs. And I think that one of the things we've lost our way in this country is we've lost a set of values that we can all agree on. And it was reminded as this hearing was going on, a quote by John F. Kennedy, which was, "When at some future date, the high court of history sits in judgment of each of us, our success or failure in whatever office we hold will be measured by the answers to 4 questions. Were we truly men of courage? Were we truly men of integrity? Were we truly men of judgment? And were we truly men of dedication?" And I think that we've become so inner focused that we don't look at what the greater good is anymore. And I'll make one last comment. The other thing I think we're very poor in this country of doing is we're pretty good about defining a problem, and then we're okay at coming up with a solution, but we're terrible about implementation. So we spend all our time talking and talking and talking, and nothing gets done. So I've sat on a lot of blue ribbon panels and saw nothing accomplished. So that's my comment. Thank you.
Wow, boy, you're raising some important points. Another point I thought you might be going to make was that we're not always aware of how much time you have to invest if you're going to run for office, and if you're going to follow someone who's running for office. I mean, Americans like the instant solution. Okay, he's running or she's running, and let's see what happens in November. And then let's go on to the next person. But meanwhile, those processes have been going on for years and years and years. People that run for the library board, and then the town council, and then the county government, and then it takes a long, long time. And there hasn't been enough, I think, awareness of that by Americans, or patience with what's involved in actually running for office and being a good candidate and a good elected official. Maybe we'll be a little more mindful of giving out a few more gold watches and some statuettes at an annual banquet to people who are doing good jobs as elected officials, because they need a pat on the back to stay in there. It's become a very, very difficult arena to be in. I mean, I was an elected official in the 80s, 90s, and already by the 90s, it was becoming a really, really a harsher game, mainly because of the influence of the media. 24/7 talk radio meant that people were looking for fights all the time. If you wanted to come on to an FM station, you had to be willing to go on to the noon election hour, whatever they call it, Politics Today, and they wanted you to be belligerent. They didn't want you to get on and talk about, hey, I know how you and I could bridge our differences, sir or madam. They didn't want that. They wanted people who were going to play knock 'em sock 'em politics all the time. And that's what we have now. We have knock 'em sock 'em politics. And a lot of people just walk away from that. They don't want to listen to it. They don't want to vote for it, and they don't want to run for it. So I'm hoping we can get started again with younger people. As I say, I'm working on my grandsons already to see what I can do.
Mr. Meyer, go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mike, and kudos to you for holding this whole act together. And thank you, Dr. Desfosses, for putting up with us.
Oh, my pleasure. I couldn't wait for today.
I think there are 2 or 3 points in my mind at any rate. And somebody mentioned about the people that Trump attracted back in 2017, 16. and why they were attracted to them. And I don't think anybody has definitive answers on that, other than he appealed to a lot of folks who were very dissatisfied with the way things were going as affected them, or as they perceived it was affected them. The country basically was in pretty good shape when he was elected. But you have a vast horde of people, and 74 million by the last count, who didn't like what was going on. Some of them took to the streets, as we saw on January the 6th, which was one extreme. But the other is the vast number of millions of people who just are unhappy with the way things are structured. Biden may be a good man, and he is, and he knows how to get things done, at least as he perceives it. But there are a lot of people that don't trust him for whatever reason. And those are the people that are going to stand back and throw the brickbats. As far as the Republican Party is concerned, I have my doubts that it's going to fracture, but there's a large percentage of people that will follow Trump's lead, whatever that's going to be. He hasn't put out any thoughts in that regard, and he certainly didn't file a platform in which to run in the last election. And that's probably what cost him. He didn't have any vision to bring over the next 5 to 6 million people to his camp, in which he would have won the election. So he disappointed his followers. He may have disappointed himself, but he probably wouldn't admit to that. But I like to close with the observation that he's going to be at least age 78 by the time the next election is in full gear, leading up to November of 2026. And in that regard, he's suspicious in my mind as to whether he's got the physical characteristics they're going to be able to withstand it. I have a fear that Mr. Biden is going to have to pull back significantly in order to survive, because 4 years of a presidency is a mighty toll on anyone. Thanks very much.
Oh, you're making some terrific points. And I too worry about Biden. Every time I see him on TV, I look at him very closely to see how he seems to be faring. I mean, he seems to be as strong as he's ever been. And I notice that he's appearing more in public with his wife, which I think is very good, because she animates him. She makes him feel, you know, relaxed and whatever. And I think he's getting a lot of, and she's good for publicity for him. So I think he's getting some more support. I don't know, you know, besides, I've been following the career of Kamala Harris to a greater degree than I ever had before, obviously. And I think that she is a very, very strong vice president, and I think a very good choice on his part and the party's part. And she's going to be there to support him all the way. And he's hopefully going to be allowing her to grow. I don't want him to treat her as just some yakety yak VP. This woman is going to be the president of the United States one day. And hopefully at the end of his term, she'll be running for president of the United States. But he needs to be pushing her forward more to make sure that she gets the attention that she deserves and becomes as strong as she can, because she can be a really powerful leader, I'm convinced. And he needs all those strong people in his cabinet.
Louise Harbert, go ahead, please.
Yes, I'd like to follow up with the last comment that was made about the Republicans that did vote for Donald Trump, and watching the impeachment hearings and seeing the footage of the mob attack on the Capitol, which I'm sure everybody was as upset as I am about that, and it will take us a long time to, if we ever get over that. But what effect do you think that we're talking about 74 million people that voted for Donald Trump, but a portion of those people are Republicans that could not see the road to vote for a Democratic president and never would, but they're not the part of the white supremacists or the people that were in that mob. And is there a future in the Republican Party for a vote from like your white, well, your suburban housewives that are Republican, that really are conservative, but they just cannot vote for a Democrat, but they want their party to be the true Republican Party? What is the future? And also the other comment that I'd like to make, with Donald Trump's age, it's not just Donald Trump. There'll always be a candidate that could be smarter and more dangerous than he was, because he's created that atmosphere now in the Republican Party. So we really have to watch out for that. But are there enough Republicans that will salvage their party for what we remember the Republican Party being?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question. I think the Nikki Haley's maybe, are the kind of future for the Republican Party that you're talking about. I think what they may end up with, though, is the Marco Rubios. Now, Marco Rubio is incredibly smart, but he goes off the rails so quickly. He gets angry, he gets harsh, he gets vindictive sounding. I don't know what he's going to do about that. And I don't think they've got their the next level of candidates groomed well yet. But they better hurry up, because people are already running, like you say, for 2024. In fact, people are late if they're just going to announce they're running now for 2024. It's too late. Those trains have already left the station. So it's constant. I mean, the good news about politics is that it's never over. It's never over. As soon as one election is over, people are at the corner diner that night, deciding who's going to run the next day for the next iteration. I mean, it's that quick. I couldn't believe it when I was in political life. How quickly people forgot and how quickly they moved on, because it's just, the train's always leaving the station, and if you're not on it, somebody else will be on it. People are pretty hang loose about who they elect. Now, we may go through another ideological phase, and by the way, that's something that has been mentioned about Donald Trump many, many times, that he has been not in that ideological vein at all. But meanwhile, of course, a lot of ideological thinkers, people who want the Christians to be more of a political force, a lot of those groups are forming and getting their political platforms together and whatever. So we may, in reaction to Donald Trump, go into a very strong ideological political force in the next election series. I'm just waiting for that to happen, because there's too much strong ideological and partisan belief in this country for it to just disappear. It's out there. It's waiting for us.
Tom Appich, go ahead, please.
Thank you. I have a couple of observations and then perhaps a question. One of the things that struck me early on about Donald Trump, even during the 2016 campaign, was how easily he brushed aside would-be competitors. As a coworker once put it, he destroyed his competition with one-liners.
Yeah.
Little Marco Rubio,
right.
Sleepy, what was it? I forget the others, but he didn't have to debate. He didn't have to do anything. And I think, to me, that speaks to the hold that he has, as you say, the genius that he has for communication. And that's both a positive and a negative in my view. On the positive side, it's tied to him personally. I don't think anybody else is going to pick up that banner and be able to run with it the way he has. And secondly, I think that personally, I think that when this country really started to become polarized was with the end of the Cold War, possibly because the Cold War was something that Democrats and conservatives and liberals could more or less agree on, and perhaps that paved the way for some common ground. But with the end of the Cold War, you had the emergence of the Atwater and Newt Gingrich and so on and so forth. So I don't think that was a coincidence. But my question is, we see the country terribly polarized now, perhaps as more so than it's been since the Civil War. We see the problem. I don't personally see the solution. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I don't know. I mean, I'm back thinking about Newt Gingrich. Newt Gingrich was a very, very influential force in American politics, much more so than we're even aware. I mean, he was a no holds barred, bring out the flamethrowers if you had to, do whatever you could if you to win. That was the whole approach, and that had not been the public approach of elected officials before that. And
Dan
that
Atwater did that first.
standard for a lot of that flame-throwing behavior that we've seen ever since.
Right.
And I don't know, you know, I mean, they keep talking in the Republican sense about the middle of the road. Where are the suburban women Republicans? You know, how much more time are they going to give President Trump before they rise up in some kind of protest against what he's doing to their party and what he's doing to their sense of American life and American values? So far, they've either I guess gone home and sat down, or they're being co-opted by him. But they're not supporting anybody who's more sensitive, sensible than he is as a counter to him. So I don't know where that leaves us, you know. I think that a lot of, I know in the Democratic Party, as we speak, there are people meeting all over the country, young Democrats, young, you know, young this, young that. I don't know if the Republicans, I assume they have their farm team that they're developing, but they better get on it because life is going to pass them by to the expense of all of us. There are a lot of very, very strong fracturing type forces out there that are all waiting to get under the Republican umbrella. And I know that McConnell keeps saying, you know, Republican Party is a big tent. We can absorb more and more people. It doesn't really matter how many groups are under there. But in fact, it does matter. You get too many anti-type groups, anti this, anti that. It's too fracturing to be a political success. So I think a lot of people are just watching to see what's going to happen. And you know, within a couple of months, the next candidates will be off and running. You know, we're late, in fact, for the 2020 2024 campaigns. We're late.
Bob Heyer, go ahead, please.
Ellen, Bob Heyer, I'm glad to see you again.
Hey, good seeing you, Bob.
You know, there are two things. One, Twitter as an influence with President Trump has been a major tool. Do you see that being the same influencing tool? Normally, we use a staff, and the staff then provides to the president, and you see the way we're running now with a typical every day or every other day briefings, PR briefings. The second thing is Mitch McConnell has probably been the biggest facilitator for Trump.
Oh, yes.
And the thing is not only did he stymie President Obama, but he also made bad PR for both Congress and the Democratic Party and Hillary. So, you know, here is an impediment to progress, if you will. And the other part of it is that he allowed the judgeships, a tremendous number of judgeships, to be approved. And that then becomes a problem because there are a number of young ones that are in there now. So it's going to take us a generation to get out from under that. My point there is, I think we ought to restrict the term of Supreme Court judges to 12 years, which is 2.5 presidential periods, if you will, or 3 presidential periods. So my thoughts on both Twitter and on judgeships.
I think you're making some very good points. You know, we assume that the way we do it is the only way to do it or the best way to do it. And I talked about that in the beginning. American exceptionalism. Everything we do is unique. Everything we do is the best, and no one can challenge us. But in fact, we need to learn a lot from some other countries, I think. And on the issue of, you know, who gets to run for office, Is it
Yeah.
survival of the fittest? Is that what we want? Do we want to be grooming people more? Do we want to be educating people more about politics and bringing them in that way? I had a patron, a political patron in the Democratic Party in
Mhm.
Albany, who was the county chair, and he thought I was just terrific at a time when other candidates weren't so sure I was so terrific. And next thing you know, you get appointed to the water board, and I was on the water board and the port commission and the this and the that. And I learned a lot. I learned to keep my mouth shut a lot more than I used to. And I learned how to make compromises and all of that. But you need people that are going to groom the next generation of politicians.
Mm.
And I'm not sure we have the people around who are making those choices right now. I hope you're right. I hope we get them soon. The League of Women Voters used to be a major force in the preparation of women to run for office. And of course, they're barely existing anymore.
Yeah,
So
the other thing, what do you think about limiting judges' terms on the Supreme Court?
eliminating them?
On the Supreme Court.
Yeah. Oh. Well, I think that's going to be a fight.
It is a fight, but the problem with having for life term, the goodness is that it's not politically influenced. The badness is they lose touch with reality because they don't have the new ideas of how things are going along.
And they lose touch with us,
Yes.
And I think that's the confusion. They're not sure if they want to be more connected to the realities of American politics, or they want to be this group up on the hill,
Austere group.
austere and removed from the rest of us and whatever. And as long as they take that route, who cares? We don't even pay enough attention. But you put your finger on a very important point, which has been a big part of Trump's political success, and that is the ability to appoint all these young judges.
Yeah.
I think he's appointed more young judges than any other president has appointed. Hundreds of them.
Which has a generation of influence.
That's right. He'll be gone and they'll be still there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very fascinating. He's very smart, and I've always felt that way. From the minute I heard him talk, I remember I was in the car one day driving back from Albany, New York, or wherever down here, and I heard him speaking, and he was talking about what his beliefs were and everything, and I thought, oh no, this man is wicked, but he's making a lot of sense. That's a very dangerous combination for the rest of us. And sure enough, here we are, spending our time talking about him.
Alice Heyer, go ahead, please.
One issue that we have not brought up at all in regard to people voting for Trump is the issue of abortion, and whether it is evangelical Christians or non-evangelical Christians and the Catholic Church, which in an area where I live in Tampa, one large church, I mean, it's very pro-Trump because of the issue of abortion, and all else doesn't matter. So could you comment on that?
Yeah, thank you. That's an excellent point. I think the fact that Biden is Catholic and a practicing Catholic is throwing a lot of new mixtures into this religious thing. He's very liberal, but he goes to church every weekend. He goes to confession. He does the whole bit. And people aren't used to that in their Catholic officials. And I think his attitudes on abortion are very, very liberal, which is building another set of bridges. I think as a result of what we're seeing now in American politics, there'll be a lot of choices and changes on the religious front between now and the next election.
However,
if you're
the people that are Catholic, for instance, say that Biden, they would never vote for him because he is not a good Catholic. He is not following the teachings of the church.
Yeah.
And so I think it doesn't matter what he does, but if he is for any liberalization of abortion, and that's also a large group of people.
Yeah, but I'm Catholic, and there are a lot of liberal Catholics out there, and a lot of liberal Catholics who go to church every Sunday, and a lot of us are voting for Biden. So I think your point is an excellent one, that there are a lot of subgroups within Catholicism, but the groups are shattering and shifting and changing, like the kaleidoscopes, they keep moving around. The shapes are changing, the sands, grains are moving in this direction and that direction. And there's new networks being established all the time among Catholics. We're changing faster than the church is changing. And we're changing as fast as the political realm is changing. So I'm optimistic, I think, from that point of view.
Marguerite Johnson, go ahead, please.
Hello. Hi. I have 2 points to make. Politics is local. What I'm more concerned about, instead of Trump, what I'm currently more concerned about are the number of states led by Republican governors and Republican legislatures who have looked at the success of minority voters in their states to vote against Trump, who are now making it even harder to vote. There are states like Wisconsin, Georgia, Texas. They're saying, well, we're not going to have these ballot boxes anymore. You're going to have 2 IDs to get you're going to have a personal ID twice for a mail-in ballot, once when you request the ballot and once when you pick it up. The Democrats have not paid enough attention to electing Democrat governors and Democrat legislators. We're still going to have problems with Trump and Trump followers if we don't start taking care of the state legislators. And the other thing, everybody keeps worrying about the extreme Republican voters. But in talking to family members who have voted for Trump, talking to my neighbors who voted for Trump, they haven't looked at these out of the world type of things that he's been saying. They've been saying things like, oh, he's been really good for the economy. And, oh, we really like the judges. Things like that. They're not the lunatic fringe. We've got to work on getting those people back into voting for, I hate to use the word liberal because everybody hates liberal, but people who are not racist, who are not, who have a little more sense about what's going on. But we really have to start at the state levels.
Yes, I absolutely agree with you. And I was thinking that just as water finds its own level, anti-water finds its own level too. A lot of people, they didn't pay attention to state government for a long time. And all those seats were unchallenged and they were open and people could, sometimes they didn't even have to run for them. They were the only candidate on the ballot.
Yeah.
Now state government has been discovered, so people are going to move on to some other level. But politics is about change. And I think there's a lot of opportunity there. If I were a young person, I'd be over at the Young Democrats or the Young Republicans, making my way and my posters and running for something in the state party. The state level, you put your finger on it, is a very, very important level for political action in this country.
And I'd like to put a plug in for an OLLI class with people who are concerned about the tenure of judges and how we select judges. There's one that's going on, the second part, it's got corruption in the title, taught by a former judge who makes a very good, strong point for not electing judges and for making sure the judges are not political. It's very interesting. Man should give it another session as well.
Oh, good. Oh, good.
The title is Independence Corrupted.
Thank you. I couldn't remember it.
That whole question of elected versus appointed judges has been with us for decades. We go back and forth from one approach to the next. But those are such important seats, and they determine so many things. I mean, that's what they say about Trump, and I mentioned it a few minutes ago, that one of his most important influences is going to be on the judiciary, because he's appointed hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of young judges. He'll be long gone, and they'll still be carrying out philosophies like his. So he is.
Carson Fleetwood, go ahead, please.
Hello, thank you. One thing that I noticed in the 2016 election was the inaccuracy of polling. And
the what?
This campaign, the recent campaign, 2020, I was very uneasy about what the polls were saying even though they were saying consistently that Trump was behind. And I was wondering about, if there's something that can be done better with respect to how the polling is done for the politics. So,
When you said the inaccuracy of polling, first I thought of Poland, and I had to think my way out of that box. But polling, you're absolutely right. I mean, I follow the American Political Science Review has articles every quarter about problems with polling in the United States. For whatever set of reasons, we're not getting it right. We're just not getting it right. If getting it right means being able to predict. A lot of pollsters will say, well, that's not our problem. The political process is changing faster than we can keep up. So it's an amazing game right now, though, and people I know who are like John Zogby. I know John Zogby, who runs the big polling operation, and he's ready to pull his hair out, but he's always been ready to pull his hair out. It's always been one set of challenges after another. And of course, with electronic voting and everything else, people are trying to privatize that to a greater and greater degree, as pollsters want it to be more open to a greater and greater degree. And so in lies the battle, But it's fascinating to see all the horse races that are involved in American politics. Is anybody here involved in local government at all, or local politics? No. I mean, that's fascinating too, that there's so many elected and appointed positions in local government. I wonder who takes them all nowadays, whether it's young people or up and coming future calls or whatever, but it's an arena that's not really being fully utilized by the rest of us, is what I'd say.
Jan Calloway, go ahead, please.
Yeah, hi. I take exception a little bit to the term genius being applied to Trump. I think the only thing he's a genius at is showmanship and being a con man. The appointment of the judges really took place under McConnell and his deviousness, and for the same reason why Obama didn't get any judges appointed, unfortunately.
Well, I said that Trump is a genius in terms of his mass communication ability. I mean, he really knows how to put his metaphorical finger to the winds, identify what the most important gripping topics are of the day, and just glomming onto them, And obviously, he gets all the attention of the press. His ability to mobilize the press day after day after day has just been unbelievable. And the other day I saw him, he was landing in a helicopter. I don't know where he was going, but he stopped to talk to the press, and the CNN person said, oh yes, he hasn't been covered by the press on anything today. So he's mindful of the need to get coverage before the end of the day. That's why he's stopping to talk to the CNN guy. And
right, but you also used it in terms of him appointing judges, and I don't think.
Yes, oh, of course. I think that his mind is always going to see what the next level of endeavor is going to be. And someone made the point a few minutes ago about state government. If any arena of politics is being neglected, if you don't go on to them being Trump or somebody else, another candidate's going to run along and try to get his people or her people in there. So it's a constant change, and that's what makes it fascinating.
We've gone through raised hands, so I think we've covered that territory. There are a couple of items in the chat, one stating that we need to have more people like Stacey Abrams.
Oh, yes, I think she's just terrific. I don't know what she's going to end up doing in the party, but whatever it is, it's going to be very important. I mean, she's got strategic skills. She's got quantitative skills. She's a public speaker. She organizes other candidates, and she brings in people of different races. Man, I'm just standing back to see what she runs for next. It's going to be important, whatever it is.
Okay, I think that's been pretty much it.
Good. And Mike, I wanted to thank you very, very much, Michael Emery, for all that you've done for us to make this such a smooth afternoon. And you're genius at whatever you do with electronics and communication. And we've all benefited from it within OLLI. And I want to thank you for that. And I want to thank everybody who came today. Your questions, I mean, my head is just buzzing with answers I wish I'd made and questions that I wanted to answer at greater length. And it's just been energizing for me. And I'm just delighted to be at another OLLI event. So thank you all very, very much. And I look forward to seeing you again.